It's not too late to purchase your tickets for our Love the World auction. We have a fun evening planned and we don't want you to miss it. Head to the app or website today to purchase your tickets, or there's an option to purchase a table of 8. Don't forget, the childcare is available at the event and you can add that to your tickets. There's going to be dinner, entertainment, silent live dessert auction. Don't miss it.
Change his mind. I thought he had abandoned me. But I've learned you can run from God, but you can't outrun him.
Jonah is one of 12 minor prophets mentioned in the Old Testament of the Hebrew Scriptures. We refer to them as minor, not because his narrative is less significant than the major prophets, but because his narrative is very brief. Isaiah takes 66 chapters in his narrative, Ezekiel and Jeremiah 52 and 48 chapters, but if you read this book, 4 chapters, Jonah is just 43 verses. It will take you all of 8 minutes to read the entire book. And it's going to take me 4 weeks to teach it. Jonah and the whale. Jonah and the fish. You're going to find these books all over Amazon. Is it a book about Jonah or is it about a fish? The fish appears in just 2 sentences. The book of Jonah is not about a fish. The book of Jonah may be a good children's story, but to get what's going on in it, you have to be an adult. It's a brilliant book full of wit, irony, and humor. Jonah himself is a horribly flawed person, and this becomes clear throughout the story. Now, early on in the interpretation of the book of Jonah, Jonah was seen as a reluctant but still righteous prophet. But in the last, say, 500 years of scholarship, we've begun to see Jonah in a different light. In fact, his entire commentary on the book of Jonah, Martin Luther could only say this on the prophet's behalf, that Jonah is God's dear child, and that he chats with God so uninhibitedly. Now, there's this stock scene that happens in almost every action movie, where the good guy is chasing the bad guy through a dark alley or something, and then the good guy stops and looks down and sees like this red laser beam right on his chest. Okay, you know that scene? Have you seen this before? That's the book of Jonah, because you're reading the story and you're like, Jonah disobeyed, there's a great storm, there's a big fish, and then you realize, whoa, this story is about me. This whole story is aimed at punching me right in the gut. The story works to expose the worst tendencies that tend to hide inside of the hearts of God's covenant people, which is pride, hard-heartedness, judgmentalism, tribalism, small-mindedness, and an inability to grow and change and let God's grace explode the boundaries of what we think is possible in the world. Okay, that's what this story is about. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to walk through this short book, verse by verse. Let's begin. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. In Jonah, you don't read the sayings of the prophet. In Jonah, you read the story of the prophet. And this is unique, and it's the only time that we really see this in the scriptures. There are short, tiny little narratives in some other prophets, but nothing like we find in Jonah. And much in this story is supposed to be satire. Okay, for example, Jonah the prophet, the Hebrew, the man of God, turns out to be the most hateful, boneheaded character in the entire story. And then the pagan sailors and the Ninevites, okay, the bad guys, all are displayed with righteous actions. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Okay, an ancient Hebrew person would laugh here. Okay, this was funny in the ancient Near East. Why? Because Jonah's name means dove, and son of Amittai means son of faithfulness. Okay, doves are images of innocence and purity. And the son of faithfulness, Jonah is the most faithless character in the story. Verse 2, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Now, a bit of backstory is necessary here. You're just supposed to know about Nineveh. Okay? You're just supposed to know about Jonah, who only appears one other time in the entire Hebrew Scriptures. Jonah is a national hero. Jonah is known for prophesying that Israel would increase its national territory. Okay, that's what he's known for. He's mentioned in the book of Kings. And now he's being asked to preach a message to Israel's most hated enemies. Okay, Nineveh, it's the capital city of Assyria. Okay, and they are the nation that wiped out 10 of the tribes of Israel, wiped them right off the face of the map. Okay, they ceased to exist as a people group, all because of Nineveh. They were the most brutal, oppressive, and violent of the ancient empires. Their general practice was to plunder a city and then skin alive all of the leaders of that city and then parade them throughout the town. Horrible. And God's calling the prophet Jonah to go there and bless them. No. God could bless Israel, but Jonah would be damned literally before he would see God's blessing shed on his enemies. Okay, this is it's like parachuting into Berlin during World War II with a sign saying, down with the Third Reich. Okay, you don't do this. This is dangerous. This could get you killed. And so God sends Jonah, the dove, the nationalist prophet, the son of faithfulness, to Nineveh, where all of the worst enemies reside. Verse 3, but Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Okay, here is a map of the Assyrian Empire. There's Nineveh. It's east. And so where does Jonah go? Well, he goes west. And not just west. Tarshish is the equivalent to what we would call Timbuktu. Okay? It was the last port before the vast ocean. It was the edge of the known world. Jonah doesn't just flee. He actually flees as far as you can in the opposite direction. God said, go east. Jonah goes west. God directs him to travel over land. He went by sea. Sent to the big city, he bought a one-way ticket to the end of the world. And it's deeper than that. Okay, Tarshish wasn't just far away. There was an allure to that place. You see in 1 Kings 10, once upon a time, King Solomon's fleet once sailed to Tarshish. They spent 3 years there, came back to Israel bringing gold, silver, ivory, monkeys, and peacocks. So the Hebrew mindset was that Tarshish is some kind of distant paradise. It's an escape from reality. It's Vegas. It's Disney World. Chapter 1 of Jonah reveals a human tendency that's within all of us that tends to occur when God calls us to do something that's difficult. And Jonah responds with resistance. If you have ever felt a nudge of God that you have responded to with resistance, you are actually in good company in the scriptures. It was true of Moses. You remember in Midian where Moses had that vision of the burning bush and God called him through this epiphany to return to Egypt and lead his people out of slavery. Do you remember how Moses responded? He said, I'm inadequate, I'm ignorant, I'm inept, I'm untalented, I'm unavailable. Okay? Resistance. It's a human truth and it's a biblical truth. It was true for the prophet Jeremiah, who was called as a young man and who responded to God by saying, no, I'm just a boy. I'm too young. How about Isaiah? Same with him, who during temple worship was called of God and he responded by saying, I'm a man of unclean lips living among a people of unclean lips. Resistance. It is par for the course. almost always our initial response to God's commission is resistance. Now this month, February, it's Black History Month. And in January, we remembered Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm still amazed by the courage of Dr. King. His willingness to accept the task. His family didn't want him to take up the task of civil rights. But late one night in January of 1956, he decided that he would follow the call of God. The phone rang one night at the parsonage of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, where at 27, Martin Luther King was the pastor. And he picked up the phone that night, and the voice on the other line was menacing. And this is what the voice said. "We're tired of you and your mess. And if you're not out of this town and out of your house in 3 days, we're going to blow your house up. And we're going to blow your brains out." That's what the voice said. The mess that he was referring to, of course, was the Montgomery bus boycott that started a month earlier when an exhausted employee named Rosa Parks refused to get up out of her bus seat for a white man. After the call, Martin went into the kitchen. This is late night. Everybody else is asleep. And he had a decision to make. He realized, he said, that he was called in the belly of a whale called segregation. At first, he said, I tried to figure a way out. I thought to myself, if I could have left Montgomery without looking like a coward, I would have done it. Resistance. But then something happened. As he began to pray out loud, he said, I heard a voice calling my name. A voice that was purer and stronger than the one I heard on the phone. And the voice said, Martin, get up. Martin, stand up. Stand up for truth. Stand up for justice. Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for me. And he said, I wanted very badly to hop on a boat to Tarshish, but God left me in Montgomery in a storm. He could have fled to higher ground, but he said, I could not flee that voice. And he learned the lesson of Jonah, and that's this. You can run, but you cannot hide from God. Psalm 139, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, I settle on the far side of the sea. Even there, your hand will hold me fast. You can't get away from the voice. You can run, but you can't hide. And so Jonah goes to Joppa and finds a ship ready to take him to the edge of the world. Resistance. Some rabbis suggest that the waiting ship at Joppa constitutes a sign of divine approval for Jonah's decision to flee. See, I knew I wasn't supposed to go to Nineveh. Here's a ship to take me wherever I want to go. How convenient. In our disobedience, in our sin, there will always be a boat and a port to take you where you want to go. If you want to sin, you can always find some justification for it. If you want to sin, there's always going to be a boat in the harbor waiting for you. Verse 4. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. Okay, the ship here is pondering. Okay, the ship had a brain, and in the story, should I break into pieces or should I not? It's meant to make the reader chuckle. Verse 5. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. The sailors are alert enough to know that this is no ordinary storm. It was divine. We don't know which God is angry at us, so let's try praying to as many as we know of. Verse 5, but Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Down to Joppa. Down to the boat. Down below deck. Laying down to sleep. And in the next chapter, it says that Jonah descended down to Sheol, the place of the dead. You see, in disobedience, every step we take is down. When the fierce storm began, the mariners were terrified, it says in verse 5. Yet Jonah is deep in the hold of the ship, sleeping soundly. The 19th century Scottish minister Hugh Martin says that Jonah was sleeping the sleep of sorrow. Some of us know exactly what that is. The desire to escape reality through sleep, even if just for a bit. He was profoundly spent and exhausted, drained by powerful emotions of anger, guilt, anxiety, and grief. And so the captain goes below deck and he finds this sleeping prophet and he says to him, "Arise." Now, in Hebrew, it's the same words God used when calling Jonah to arise, go, and call Nineveh to repentance. But as Jonah rubs his eyes, it is not God speaking to him, but rather a Gentile mariner with God's very words. Not even in the most hidden part of the boat can Jonah escape God's instructions. If not God's, then the captain's. What's going on? God sent his prophet to point the pagans toward himself, and yet now it is the pagans pointing the prophet towards God. Verse 7. Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who's responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us who is responsible for making all this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" The sailors continue to act in commendable ways. Discerning that there is a human sin and a divine hand behind the storm, they cast lots. Casting lots in order to discern the divine will was really common in the ancient times. It is possible that each man's name was put like on a stick, and then the one that was chosen was Jonah's. We don't know exactly what that looked like. Verse 9, he answered, "I am a Hebrew and I worship," the Hebrew word here is fear, "the Lord, the God of heaven, Yahweh, who made the sea and the dry land." No, you don't, Jonah. You don't fear Yahweh. Who says that they fear Yahweh? Jonah. Who actually fears Yahweh? The pagan sailors. This is the height of religious hypocrisy. You don't fear Yahweh. We can see it right here. His words and his religious confession of faith are in deep contradiction to the choices that he's making. So the storyteller is just feeding us this hypocritical man of God, and we readers are just soaking it in. Okay, this is great. This is rich. He doesn't really fear God. What kind of person disobeys and then proclaims to worship the Lord? Oh, darn it. That's me. The laser's pointing back at me. The moment we begin to feel superior to Jonah, we fall into the mirror we're presented with in the Bible, that it reveals us. It's a mirror. Have you ever had a contradiction between what you say and how you actually live? And the sailors, they can see this contradiction. Verse 10, this terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" Then the storyteller whispers in our ear. They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. He's taking us back to the port in Joppa. He told them then. And now they're like, "You're running away from the God of the land and the sea on our boat. What are you doing?" Often this happens, okay? It is the people who are outside of the people of God who can see and point out the religious hypocrisy of the people of God. Verse 11, the sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Okay, Jonah, he cracks me up, okay? Not only that, he doesn't even have the nerve to jump over the ship by himself, okay? He makes them do it, okay? What a selfish guy, right? And so this guy endangers the lives of these sailors by his disobedience, and now he wants to turn them into murderers as well. Throw me overboard. Now, why does Jonah say this? It could be two things. Either Jonah has really had a change of heart, and he's been awakened to the fact that his decisions have harmed others, or Jonah is doubling down and saying, I'd rather die than go to Nineveh. He could be trying to get even further away from Yahweh. You see, what begins as a step west instead of east soon accelerates into a maelstrom of self-destruction. When the sailors discover that it's Jonah's fault, what does Jonah say is going to stop the storm? Does he say, listen guys, I've disobeyed the Lord. Let's turn the boat around and let's head back to Joppa and the storm's going to stop. Not only would the storm have stopped, but they would have had the best sailing wind to Joppa. Jonah doesn't say any of that. Verse 13. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land. Notice that the narrator no longer refers to them as sailors. From now on, they are men. But they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased. Here is the complete role reversal. The pagan sailors are acting like righteous prophets, and the righteous prophet is acting like pagan sailors. Then they took Jonah, threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord. The Hebrew is, they feared a great fear, and they offered sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. All of this is ironic. Jonah was fleeing God because he did not want to go and show God's truth to pagans. But that is exactly what he ends up doing. Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? A little too ironic. Yeah, I really do think. Okay, Daniel C. Timmer writes this. Jonah's anti-missionary activity has ironically resulted in the conversion of non-Israelites. These sailors, these men, are now converted. And this is no foxhole conversion. Okay, you're familiar with the term foxhole conversion. Okay, there's guns firing everywhere. You're a soldier and you're buried in a foxhole and you say, God, if you get me out of this, I'll do anything for you. And then God gets you out of it and you forget everything you just said. Foxhole conversion. It's people under duress making vows to God and offering obedience when there is impending doom. But after the danger passes, the religious observances and prayers just fade away. These men in Jonah chapter 1 were different. They made their vows after the danger passed. That indicates that they were not seeking God for what he could do for them, but simply for the greatness of who he is in himself And that is the beginning of true faith, not what God can do for you. I remember a documentary about Mount St. Helens, okay, the volcano in the state of Washington that erupted in 1980, the year I was born. There was this reporter who had gone up there to get a news story, and he had taken his camera. And the volcano was just kind of rumbling. And he was up there when it began to erupt. And so he begins to run down the side of the mountain, and he left his camera on with the microphone. And the pictures that he took, the video there, it was unintelligible. You couldn't understand what he was recording. He's running. But the audio, that was clear, real clear. You can imagine what he was saying. He said, oh God, my God, help. Oh Lord, God, get me through. God, I need you. Please help me. I don't know where I am. Sobbing, rapid breathing, spitting, gagging, coughing, panting. It's so hot, so dark. Help me, God. Please, please, please. The reporter survived and appeared on a news show a few days later, and that recording was played for him. And he said, I don't remember saying any of that. There is something about crisis that compels humanity to cry out. Perhaps you too have made a foxhole conversion. God, if you get me out of this financial struggle, I promise I'll get things right with you. I promise you'll be the priority, not money. God, please just provide me with a spouse, and then I'll follow you with everything. God, please just bless us with a child. Live your vow. And maybe God hasn't answered your prayers yet. Could you still live your vow, whether he answers or not? Because if not, we're kind of like Jonah, right? Running away from God because it seems his hope for your life is different than yours. Verse 17 of Jonah chapter 1. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. More on that next week. Would you live your vow? Would your convictions and words you speak about Jesus be matched by your life? God, I pray that you would remove hypocritical religiosity from our own lives. May what we say about you match how we live for you. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to thank you so much for joining us for week 1 of Jonah. We can't wait for next week, for week 2. It's going to be a doozy. God bless you. Grace and peace in the Middle East.